they knew I was tall, so that's so I hope it works with the slides. It might be a little iffy, but we'll go for it and back up if I run into problems. I'm not an art historian. I'm just a person, a writer who likes to look at paintings and then try to articulate the experience of looking at them. I've always loved Chardin and have been thinking about why for a long time. I've written about him twice. Once when I was reviewing a still life show at the Modern. Chardin, of course, was not in that show. It's a 20th century show, but because it was about still life, I found it necessary to think about it. And more recently, I wrote this essay, the one I'm going to read today, after going to Paris to see 99 paintings that were at Le Grand Palais in October. It was more Chardin than I'd ever seen in my life before, and it was a great show. Painting, the death of which has been declared over and over, is a form that haunts me. I think painting keeps coming back because, like narrative in the novel, something people are also killing off regularly, it has physiological power. Paintings live inside us as part of myriad inner pictures we carry around with us. They become part of our bodies in memory. Of course, the connection between the outside, that is visual information, and the inside, the way the brain processes it, remains mysterious. Paintings are always flat and usually rectangular, and this window convention appeals to ordinary human voyeurism, to peeping and discovery. What is interesting about peeping in Chardin is that you look in the window of the painting and see you see truly banal objects and people, and yet they're fascinating and moving. And it's this fascination and this emotion that I wanted to talk about today. Jean-Simeon Chardin's biography is a collection of fragments, a life cobbled together from official documents, observations, and stories told by friends, and from contemporary critiques of his work. As far as I know, there are no extant letters by Chardin, no journal, no intimate record of any kind. The bones of his life are interesting anyway, as much for what is missing as for what is known. The artist was born in 1699 in Paris, a city he never left. His father was a craftsman who specialized in the design and construction of billiard tables. Chardin was not trained at the Royal Academy of Painting, but at the less prestigious Academy of St. Luke. Nevertheless, in 1728, he gained admission to the Academy as, quote, a painter skilled in animals and fruit. He married the 22-year-old Marguerite Santard at Saint-Sulpice in January of 1731, and 10 months later they baptized their son, Jean-Pierre. 2 years after that, their daughter, Marguerite Agnès, was born. In 1835, Chardin's 26-year-old wife died. And then either in 1736 or 1737, his little daughter died as well. Chardin exhibited regularly at the salons, and in November of 1740 was presented to Louis XV at Versailles and gave him 2 pictures. We should have them. Okay. Can we see these? Yes, that's it. Saying grace in the diligent mother. In 1744, maybe you want to look at them. I'm not going to talk about them so much now, but that's okay. In 1744, he remarried a widow of comfortable circumstances, Françoise Marguerite Puget. By 1754, Chardin had received his first royal pension, and his son had won the Academy's Grand Prix competition. Biographers underscore that Chardin hoped that Jean-Pierre would become a history painter and surpass him by taking on what was considered a far loftier genre than either still life or the domestic scenes he worked in himself. Chardin became the treasurer of the Academy, and his son received a stipend to attend the Royal Academy at Rome. In 1757, father and son became embroiled in a dispute over the son's inheritance from Chardin's first wife. That same year, the painter was granted living quarters in the Louvre, and in 1761 he became officially responsible for hanging paintings in the Salon exhibitions, something he had done unofficially earlier. In his critical pieces on the shows, Denis Diderot makes much of Chardin's cleverness when it came to these arrangements. He notes that the astute artist hid bad paintings and displayed good ones or hung a terrible work beside a great one to bring out the latter's merit. While returning from Rome the following year, this is a fact I love, Jean-Pierre Chardin, Chardin's son, was kidnapped by pirates. In every, I tell you, in every chronology of Chardin's life, this just goes completely without comment. They just say that, you know, in this year he was kidnapped by pirates. I think it's amazing. You know, no one speculates on how anyone felt. It's just they know he was kidnapped by pirates. That's all that's there. In 1767, he reappeared in Venice. It's great. Again, you know, it's just amazing. Where he is believed to have committed suicide sometime during the next 2 years. Chardin continued to exhibit paintings at the salons, and his royal pension was increased. In October of 1779, he was too sick to go to an academy meeting, and in November, the artist died in his quarters at the Louvre. He was 80 years old. These pieces of a life suggest that the artist was reasonably successful, that despite his work in lowly genres, he was honored as a gifted painter while he was alive. He must have suffered, must have mourned his first wife and daughter, and must have had, at the very best, a complicated relation with his son. But Chardin's art is separate from the story of his life, and in his case, all that can be argued is that whoever he was, his paintings are works of great feeling that inevitably transcends their subject matter. This is the real mystery of Chardin, one articulated first by Diderot, who was overcome by the painter's canvases. This is a famous quote from Diderot. He says, "What magic is it, what art unknown to all but you, that can cast this spell?" Years later, Proust, who loved Chardin's work, articulated exactly the same mystery. In Contre Sainte-Beuve, he escorts an imaginary young man around the Louvre, pauses in front of the Chardins, and says to his fictional companion, "You're happy, aren't you? But really you have seen nothing more than a well-to-do tradesman's wife telling her daughter that she has made mistakes in her woolwork, a woman with an armful of loads." We don't have the one with an armful of loads, it's okay. You can go to the next one. I think we have a still life now. Yes, we have a still life. And even worse, table and kitchenware, not just Dresden chocolate pots and pretty things of that sort, but such as you consider ugliest, like raw fish lying about on the table and sights that turn your stomach. But Proust was no more able to explain how looking at dead rabbits and strawberries and glasses of water and raw fish can elicit happiness in the viewer than Diderot was. I have always felt deeply moved in front of paintings by Chardin. This is a wonderful example. The question is, why? I have always felt that the canvases invoke a strong human presence, even when they show nothing more than a few pieces of fruit and a cookpot. I also know that although still life is domestic in character, many still lifes, even great ones, are not particularly emotional works. By the time I walked into the exhibition in Paris, on October 17th of last year, I had already decided that I was going to try to uncover what it is about these canvases that has so moved the people who look at them. The show in Paris was curated by Pierre Rosenberg, who's the director of the Louvre. He also did a comprehensive exhibition of Chardin only 20 years ago on the bicentennial of the painter's death. The first two rooms of the exhibition were mostly still lifes. I decided to begin my own looking by examining two of the early paintings which clinched Chardin's admission to the Academy in 1728, that they should be next. There they are. This is like magic. That gives me something. Anyway, This is the skate or the rayfish and the buffet. This is what got him into, these paintings got him into the Academy. They're both clearly impressive and technically brilliant works, but they are not yet what I've come to recognize as quintessential Chardin. They are busier works, and standing before them, there was something about the two animals that bothered me. Just, I don't know, look at them, see if you have a response like that or not. There are several cats early in the show. There were several cats early in the show too, and I had the same response to them. It was as if the living creatures intruded on my Chardin. And it is all true that for the most part the artist stopped painting them. There is one notable exception to this rule in the show. The little dog that was in the painting you looked at for quite a long time here, so you will remember him. In The Diligent Mother, who, unlike the earlier animals, belongs securely to the painting and its composition. He's lying down very quietly and looking out at the viewers beyond the canvas. And here he is paired with people, not objects or dead game. Some critics have suggested that Chardin abandoned animals because he didn't want to compete with Boudry. Now, let's see if I did this right. Is there a Boudry next? Yes, there it is. Okay. There he is. There's Boudry. And while there might be some truth to this, it was surely a secondary consideration for an artist like Chardin, whose work suggests that he quickly established an aesthetic position, the result of both the way he liked to work and a profound understanding of the nature of painting itself. Animals won't sit still, a fact which must have deterred Chardin from a continuing interest in them. On the other hand, dead game are as conducive to placement as any object, and Chardin's paintings of dead rabbits and birds, of which there were many in the exhibition's second room, are almost unbearably poignant and ironically more suggestive of life than the living creatures. A painting of a dead hare with gunpowder and game bag, which I also believe is next. Yes. It's lying there on a shallow shelf against a stone wall. As I looked at this painting in the show, I sketched its outlines quickly. The hare's head hanging over the ledge, a paw near its chin, its open legs stiffened in rigor mortis. The cord which hangs between them and down the side of its long body. I moved close to the painting, then further away from it. It is true that there is pathos in the composition itself, in the way the animal is posed, the nearness of its paw to its obscured face, the brutality of the hunt suggested by the cord, and the fact that the background feels empty, a simple void of wall, nuanced with color. On close inspection of this canvas, I began to notice Chardin's use of red, the recurring red-brown in the animal's fur, but also a truer red, and a red that verges on pink, which repeats itself throughout the animal's carcass. The touch of red in its lower ear, in its paw, and near its genitals. The clarity of this red from up close and its overtly painted quality is far more hidden in reproduction than in the actual painting. But the fact that the viewer can see it affects the painting's meaning. The inanimate subject matter, a dead hare, and its medium, the paint, create a balance between the convention of illusion, I am looking at a dead hare, and the truth announced by the canvas hanging on the wall. I'm looking at a painting. I think this balance is crucial to Chardin. It is what distinguishes his paintings from many of the Dutch who preceded him. Vermeer and Rembrandt are exceptions. Both Dutch still life and its genre scenes are as a whole much smoother than Chardin's painting. The use of color is far less free, and even when you get very close to a work, the illusionistic quality persists. Chardin's choice of motionless subjects is crucial to maintaining this balance between illusion and painterliness. It is possible to argue that all of Chardin's mature paintings are still lifes, although they are not all nature morte. Whether his subjects are animate or inanimate, they are depicted as unmoving. A battle scene by Géricault or a canvas by Jackson Pollock both suggest violent motion. But the truth is that they too are still. The sword will never fall, and the paint is no longer dripping. Chardin chose subject matter that would mimic the frozen, silent character of the canvas itself. Pictures of objects, food, dead animals are obvious choices. But as has often been noted by Rosenberg and others, Chardin's people don't move either. Let's see what we have next. Here we go. Okay. The little girl with the shuttlecocks is not playing the game. She is staring into space as one of her hands rests on a chair. A little boy watches the top. I think we should have two more slides with the boy with the top. There he is. Sorry, we can go back. There he is, the boy with the top. Absorbed and silent. A governess is leaning forward in a listening posture. We don't have this one. The child has been telling her something, but he appears to have taken a breath between sentences. The laundress has paused during her work. The woman returning from the market leans against the cupboard after laying down her bread. Let's see, we can go backwards too, right? So we can, right, and then if we go forwards, we could go backwards. Go forwards a couple more, because these are just, in general, we're talking about these. Okay, great. Yeah, okay. So there's the return from market and the bubble blower. Even Chardin's young bubble blower seems to have blown until the bubble has reached a good size and is now fixedly admiring his work, while another smaller child looks on. Do you see the little smaller child? It's like, even in the painting, the other child is quite dim, but it's a kind of wonderful little face back there. Taken as a whole, the human figures, almost all of them are women and children, share this quality of pause. And as I studied the portraits and the figures in the genre scenes, I saw that in that moment of distraction or thoughtfulness, their facial expressions are very similar. Although not identical, the range of expression among Chardin's subjects is tiny, from sober inwardness to the barest hint of a smile. Again, I thought of the Dutch, of Jan Steen, for example, whose people laugh and talk as well as think. As I walked very slowly from one room to another, I wanted to block out the people who were looking at the paintings with me. Because I was slow and making sketches, I was jostled and pushed and elbowed. When I moved out of the way for a man and a woman who had stopped for a moment in front of the laundress, did we have the laundress back there? No, I think we have it ahead. It's okay. Just, it's the same principle. I found myself looking at them rather than at the painting. Their expressions resembled each other, and they resembled the characters in the paintings. Attentive, relaxed, a slight upward turn at the corners of their mouths. Later that same evening, I noticed that this is not the expression people wear on the metro or on the subway. Travelers look duller, unengaged, absent. Although it seems unlikely that Chardin consciously painted figures whose expressions would mirror those of viewers who look at his canvases, contemplation of a painting also constitutes a pause from daily life. It is both an external experience and an internal one. The viewer absorbs the effect of the picture and responds quietly, inside him or herself. Through images of deliberate stillness, Chardin's canvases enhance rather than interrupt the continuum between viewer and painting. And this quietude or stillness allows his brush stroke and his color a greater effect. Let's see if we have the woman taking tea now. We have the laundress. Go to the next one, see if you have the woman. Yes, okay. There's the woman taking tea. Again, I noticed the reoccurrence of reds in the genre scenes. The woman takes her tea on a red table with an open drawer. The red reappears in the thinnest stripes of her silk dress, and more notably in her cheeks, lips, ear, and hand. There is a rusty tone to the olive background which is muted and mottled. The repetition of color and the relation of one color to another, red to green to brown, offset by blue and the bluish steam from the tea, which is really, you can see it here in the reproduction. In the real painting, it is a sight to behold, that steam. Is not mimicking nature or truth, as Chardin's contemporaries like to think. The repetitions of color in the composition are an insistence on visual harmonies which aren't natural so much as part of an ideal vision, one that creates tangible, painted repetitions which connect one thing to another. When painted by Chardin, human beings and objects are joined together in a grand scheme in which separation is downplayed in favor of wholeness. By the time I had finished looking at the genre paintings, work Chardin took up and then abandoned for a return to still life, I was going from one painting to another with two words in my head: red and repetition. The words, as is often the case with me, preceded any fully articulated thought, but they suggested two essential and related ideas. Later, when I returned home to New York and looked at the catalog, I saw that an art historian named Katie Scott had written an essay called Chardin Multiplied, which treats the works of other artists from Chardin, as well as the painter's reproductions of his own canvases. Chardin copied himself. Scott points out that although Chardin's reproductions may well have been lucrative, money alone doesn't explain why he painted some of his works over. In the show I saw there were 3 returns from the market and 3 laundresses, right next to each other. She argues that the pictures he copied don't portray his subject matter, but rather recreate it, because these are paintings about repetition, saying grace, for example, or returning from the market. They embody the idea of routine, sameness, of repeated action. The insight is valuable, but I think it may be taken further. Similarity and repetition lie at the heart of Chardin's work. The very act of painting a painting confirms his investment in stillness. His subject has already been caught, the fidgety model is left behind, and what matters now is the painting itself. After all, a painting is another object, and reproducing that thingness seems perfectly consistent with the artist's temperament. But I think that it was in still life that Chardin's insistence on repetition became most fully and subtly expressed, and essential to what one might call the philosophy of the paintings and their almost uncanny emotional resonance. There should be well, there's one still life. Let's see what we have next. Yeah, these are the fancy ones. Let's give me 2 more, less fancy. Yeah. Many of the objects he painted again and again belonged to his own household. They've actually tracked those objects through an auction after Madame Chardin died. It's quite interesting. I think Rosenberg has a whole catalog of them, so you can trace the real objects that were in Chardin's house. And I imagine him picking up the copper pot or the silver goblet, things he painted over and over again, and placing it on a table near a couple of other things to prepare another still life, moving it in one direction or another, in and out of the light, remembering it as it was in another work, an object familiar to him now not only as a thing in his house, but as a thing transformed by his art, as part of his private vocabulary of images. I think there should be 2 more. That's the first. Let's go back. I'm going to go to the left. Great. Repetition lies at the heart of meaning. Any vocabulary, whether written or visual, relies on reoccurrence to establish comprehension. Recognition is repetition. Chardin was working inside a well-established language of painting. Viewers had looked at paintings like his before, especially from the Dutch, whose work was widely seen in Paris at the time. But they had never seen canvases quite like these. The very familiarity of the images, both in terms of painting and in terms of cultural references outside of art, the rendering of a copper pot, for example, that was a staple in all kitchens, high and low, permitted Chardin a greater freedom in their depiction. He used recognition as a catalyst for innovation in his technique. Okay, we have to turn on the lights because you have to look at your Xerox. Okay. So, okay, we're doing, actually the title isn't on there, but it's pretty obvious. It's coffee, glass of water with coffee cup. Okay. This painting, to my mind, and everybody has an opinion, and sometimes they're quite private opinions, but to my mind, this was the greatest painting that I saw in the show in Paris. It's a painting I've admired for a long time. And I think that it speaks directly to the happiness Proust mentioned in his essay written a little more than 100 years ago. What the viewer sees is, in fact, a glass of water, a coffee pot, 3 cloves of garlic, a few of their fragile leaves, and what is called a branch of fennel by the Concoul brothers, but which doesn't look like what I call fennel, or we call fennel, but the delicate sprig of some other plant or herb. The truth is that when I look at this painting, even in reproduction, even in a black and white reproduction, I get tears in my eyes. It inspires in me an almost inexpressible tenderness that is close to pain. And although my response may be extreme, I have read enough critical writing on Chardin to know that I am not alone. Once ensnared, the painter's admirers gush praise. They feel what I feel, if not for this painting, then for another. But again, why do I feel like weeping over a glass of water standing near a coffee pot? A real pot and glass of water would never have this effect on me, unless perhaps these objects had belonged to a beloved person who had died. Even so, the objects of the dead often recover their banality before long, particularly when they're used. It is an austere painting. Rosenberg notes in the catalog to the exhibition that radiography reveals that initially a bowl of strawberries was under the coffee pot. The pot is bolder and quieter than the fruit. Chardin changed the painting by simplifying it. The arrangement is triangular, as you can see, and the scale of the canvas is neither very small nor very large. It's about like this. Its size preserves a feeling of closeness without miniaturism. The color scheme is restrained, rust red and brown, white and olive green touched with black shades and subtle, complex variation. A close look reveals, and it's pretty good in the reproduction, that the brown of the coffee pot is touched by red at its rim to evoke light. A red that recurs on its handle and blotches of color on its base and along the edge of the table itself, most notably near the herb and in the garlic stems. But a deeper version of this redness reappears also beyond the pot on the olive-colored wall and near the darkened edge of the canvas itself. And then there is white. The white of the garlic and its detached leaves, the whiteness of the water's transparency, and the small touches of white on the pot that indicate light and the strip of white beneath where the garlic lies, and at the edge of the table, which blends into a smoke of near nothing in the background. The brush strokes are visible even from some distance, and an impression of dabs, touches, and pricks are fundamental to the effect of the canvas. The stiff peels of garlic, so clearly seen from a distance, are just strokes of paint when you move close to the work. the traces of the painter's hand. Chardin's body has left its mark on the canvas, and even though for many viewers that imprint may be subliminal, it is felt. The simpler the subject matter, the more opulent the human presence. Chardin's brush is like breath on the canvas, and its rhythms embody the omnipresent idea of unity through color, which repeats itself in everything and everywhere. The invisible harmonies which Chardin thrusts into appearance. The coffee pot, the garlic, the shimmering glass of water produce recognition in the viewer that goes far beyond the objects themselves, something which happens through naming alone. That's garlic, that's a coffee pot, that's a glass of water. In Chardin, these objects are imaginatively reinvented as essences of human dignity. They represent objects, but are at the same time not the objects we know. We recognize not only the nobility of the painter's labor, as made evident by the rectangle that hangs in front of us, but we see in the paint the presence of the man who worked with intelligence and love. I don't think that to mention love in Chardin's work is either mystical or unscientific. Touch lies at the bottom of all human experience. It is our first experience of another person. And the physicality of Chardin's stroke is evocative of both caresses and touches of reassurance. I am certain that these strokes made by a paintbrush lie at the bottom of Proust's comment that in Chardin one feels the affection a tablecloth has for a table. Proust's anthropomorphism unearths what we are seeing, because the objects we recognize by name as familiar, ordinary things in the world have somehow lost their deadness, their alienation, their separateness when they appear as signs on a Chardin canvas. He has used the visual language of still life in order to change its meanings. And therefore, no matter what some critics may argue, I think that Chardin sheds entirely the moral allegories of his predecessors. His still lifes don't suggest that all is vanity. In fact, there we go. Does that suggest that all is vanity? We'll take the frick now. Good, fine. Supposedly this is the same painting. You can see how slides vary. I thought we should be treated to that. His still lifes don't suggest that all is vanity, that domestic comfort is marred by the cruel fact of perdition. These are works which celebrate the ordinary present in relation to the fact of mortality. But there is no horror of death, no hint of the skull, which figures so prominently in other still life. Chardin's genre works are not didactic or pious either, and they evade sentimentality, something Greuze, for example, wasn't always able to do. They are located in a reoccurring present of domestic life, the world of habit, but are free of ethical judgments and promote an aesthetic idea that resists moral lessons. One of Chardin's contemporaries wrote, "His method of painting is singular." You can really feel it in this painting from the Frick team. He applies his colors one by one, almost without blending them, so that his pictures look somewhat like mosaics, or like pieces built of many parts, like tapestry needlepoint done in cross-stitch. For anyone who has seen Seurat, Abbé Raynal's comment may sound rash, but it invites us to reorient our vision, to read backwards and see again the unique quality of Chardin's stroke, a stroke which would have a deep influence on both Cézanne and Manet, and which would lead Vincent van Gogh to write in a letter to his brother Theo, "I am more and more convinced that true painters don't finish their pictures. From very close, the best paintings are made up of color touches posed side by side." Raynal and Van Gogh saw the presence of the brush. Proust addressed its effect on the viewer. The happiness, the affection is in the touch of the brush. Chardin's cups, goblets, his plums, peaches, and dead game are reanimated through the pathos inherent in his own gestures. One of the few quotations from Chardin, one which has been reprinted innumerable times, comes from Charles-Nicolas Cochin in his essay on the life of Monsieur Chardin. This is what he says. His repartee was frequently quick and unexpected. One day an artist expounded at great length on the methods he followed in order to purify and perfect his use of color. Growing impatient with so much chatter on the part of a man whom he knew only for the slick and cold execution of his pictures, Chardin said, "Since when does one paint with color?" "With what else?" came the astonished reply. "You should use color, but paint with your feelings." In the last room of the exhibition in Paris, this is the last guy here. And we have the last slide. There he is. Okay. I came face to face with the painter, or rather with Chardin's own self-image. The pastels which end the show, there were 3 more in the show, were done late in Chardin's life, were 3 of himself and 1 of his second wife. Although I knew the pastels intimately before I entered the exhibition, I felt rewarded when I arrived at them, because I had never seen so many of the artist's works together. And it was as if the hidden man, whose hand I had been admiring from room to room, had revealed himself to me at last. The pastels also returned me to a tiny painting much earlier in the show of an art student from behind. We have to do the lights again in this Eros. This is what, there he is. This should be hit home here. This guy. This work is notable because, unlike all the other images of people, this young man is in the act of doing something. He's drawing. He's sketching an academy study in red chalk. The student's motion reflects the action of the painter himself, as if in this instance, Chardin has allowed himself to depict movement because the student's hand mirrors his own. My subject draws and I paint him doing it. The smallness of the canvas, I tell you, it's really tiny. It's like this. I mean, it's really tiny painting. Enhances the diffident character of its human subject, and the unusually free brushstrokes of the little painting repeat the act of drawing. Open, quick, and fluid. If you look at the strokes, they're just amazingly free. They're much freer, actually, than most of the other genre paintings. It's really like he drew it. The student has a hole in his coat, through which another garment can be seen, a red one, which also sticks out from under his brown coat, where he sits and it appears through the slit in his coat from behind. The whole is touching, almost narrative in feeling. But it is also more evidence of Chardin's insistence on composing a painting as a thing of connective tissue, as if the space of the canvas is a single body. Reds dominate the image. There are also 2 canvases in the little picture, one that's blank and the other is turned to the wall. These seem to convey the idea of ongoing labor. Now, I don't know, should we want to go dark again so you can really look at him? Yeah. This is such a wonderful. The very last self-portrait in the exhibition shows Chardin holding a red pastel crayon in his hand. He is decked out in some crazy headgear tied up with a blue ribbon, peering at me from behind his spectacles. The back of his canvas, its content hidden, juts into the space in the picture. I felt as if the young student in the tiny painting several rooms ago had suddenly turned around, that now he was no longer a student, but an artist who had worked for years and grown old, but he was still holding the red chalk in his hand. Chardin gave up using oils for health reasons, and the change in medium seems to have initiated a change of subject matter, not at all strange, considering Chardin's intimate reliance on the brush and its motion. The flicks and touches and spots had to be abandoned. He took on his mirror image and the image of his wife's face, which, as anyone who has been married a long time knows, has a reflective quality itself, the answering face you see when you look up. Chardin was 70 years old when he painted himself with the red crayon in his hand. More strikingly even than in the oil paintings, the pastels create a pattern of undisguised color and its repetitions. The red of the drawing instrument reoccurs in the artist's bottom lip, his hand, his forehead and cheek as lines or rub lines. Illusion is subordinated to gesture. The painter's hand is sketched with particular boldness. The energy of the strokes is seen clearly in the dark lines between the knuckles, and the startling contrast with which the face is shaded, the whiteness with which the man's forehead appears to be illuminated. In the pastel, Chardin seems to announce himself as his own figment. His vigorous line interprets his own face, and like everything else he invented on a canvas, these self-portraits are a combination of sympathy and distance. True to form, Chardin doesn't dress himself up. He wears the relaxed and modest costume of an artist at home. In each, his neck is wrapped up in a scarf, but the simple, even comic attire, the picture of himself with an eye shade, not here, but he has this big eye shade sticking out, is almost laughable. But this is belied by the man's shrewd, concentrated gaze and the firm set of his drawn mouth. He looks out at the viewer in all three and meets his or her eyes. He announces himself as we imagine he saw himself. And he sees himself kindly, respectfully, with the compassion for the self that time brings to the mirror, the awareness of the self as a series of others changing in time. The man's humble clothes, the nonchalance of his posture, bear not a trace of vanity, but the hand that has made the homely face is confident, strong, and vigorous. If there is arrogance about himself, it lies in what Chardin has made of his reflected image. The master has used his old trick on himself, a lowly subject elevated by its prodigious form, and together they create complex strains of emotion in the spectator. When I finally left the exhibition and walked outside into the brilliant sunshine of a cold, clear Paris, I carried the image of the painter's face with me, the face of a man who has been dead for 220 years. I realized then that in the last self-portrait, Chardin reveals his secret to the viewer. The red crayon is not only a trope for a life's work, but a vibrant sign of the self-conscious spirit of that labor. With it, Chardin shows explicitly that which is implicit in all of his art. This portrait is a thing wrought out of blankness by a man's living hand. It is an object which in its stillness, deadness, and silence will outlive the person whose image you see before you. But the picture you see bears the marks of a life and remains in an eternal, immediate present. I am here, an old man, ill and dying, looking out at you. Move closer and you will see that I am these strokes, these blotches of color, this still, powerful hand. That's it.